Hello. Happy Friday, everyone. Hope that you're happy, healthy, and safe wherever you are today. I want to start off today with a little bit of a personal story. I know that I often do that. In part, I tell some of the personal stories of my life because our lives are what drive us, our experiences, our memories. And for me, it's what informs a lot of these conversations that we have about politics. There are folks who say, I'm not really into politics. Well, I don't know the exact quote or who it came from, but you don't have to get involved in politics, but politics will happen to you. They will get involved with your life. And growing up, my household was filled with a lot of political conversation. My dad was a hardcore Reagan Republican, and my mother is a lifelong Democrat. And sometimes they would get in arguments, but it was always like amicable. Like it wasn't certainly, that wouldn't have been a reason for them to get divorced or separate, but they were definitely at odds when it came to politics. And I was somewhat involved here and there. I mean, look, I was very excited the first time I voted. I never really got involved in campaigns. I was lulled into complacency when it came to issues like abortion and gun control. And not complacency in the sense that I wasn't outraged when there were clearly efforts being made to infringe upon a woman's right to determine her own future. And I certainly was outraged that there was, and I guess the complacency as far as gun legislation goes is that we keep trying and nothing changes. And it's not that I give up. I am a board member of 1AIM, a coalition dedicated to ending gun violence. And I try to find the ways to have positive impacts in those regards. However, I would say my most intense drive to become involved in our government. I know that they were actually talking about this earlier on Joan's show and how we don't have a lot of journalists covering our state politics. And I became very involved in state politics when my son Declan was born with significant challenges. Declan was born today, July 29th. And when he was born, he was not breathing. They did not think that he would survive. And they told me his neurologist, who was examining him and running all kinds of tests because really no one knew what had gone wrong, they told me that if he did survive, he might never walk, he might never talk, and he might never surpass the intellectual ability of a 2-year-old. And that was a devastating blow. Really, all we had asked at that point was, because we knew he had come into this world with a lot of complications. When he was born, he was not breathing on his own. They had to send in a team immediately. I tell this story about how I really don't know how everything happened. It felt like I was underwater because I delivered Declan and they held him up for me. And I remember they put him on my chest briefly, and I said to Steve, "We make beautiful babies," because Declan is my second child, and Griffin, his older brother, had been born 23 months prior. And there wasn't any getting around, though, for us that he did look different. He looked bluish green, and they took him from me immediately. And that was when I noticed they must have pushed a button for an emergency because it turned out he wasn't breathing, and they had to resuscitate him and bag him and start providing oxygen for him. And for those of you who are familiar with what an APGAR score is, it measures brain activity, and normal brain function should be over 5, and Declan's was a 1, meaning that he had significant brain damage. Now, mind you that once they started giving him oxygen, he did bounce back, and they test like reflexes and movement of the eyes and things like that. But I was still under the impression that everything was hopefully going to be okay, and that we would take our baby home in a couple of days. And they told us that he had, it was something that presented like pneumonia, like he perhaps aspirated amniotic fluids. And I was sort of soothed by that. And even the next day within a few hours, I got to see him, and he was in a little plastic. The best they can do still for babies who are born fragile is basically a big Tupperware bin. And they brought me in a few hours after he was born, I think they had decided he was stable enough for me to come see him. I got to see my little baby boy. And mind you, from that moment that we held him for a few seconds right after he was born, we did not hold him again for almost a week because he was on life support. They within a few hours, they had to put him on a ventilator. and provide him fluids. And I didn't know what to think, honestly, because they had said, we are going to give him a round of antibiotics. We're going to run some tests, but they told me that he would be going home in about 3 days. And then 3 days became 3 more days. And then that became a week. And when we got to about 2 weeks, it was getting harder for us to ask when we could take our son home with us. And they sent the neurologist in, and that's when he told us his thoughts, that he didn't think that he was not entirely sure Declan was going to survive, and he went through all these things about. He said the weirdest thing, and Steve and I sometimes laugh about this. We were like, all we had asked, honestly, again, let me remind you, all we had asked was, when can Declan go home? Which I get that he had all this other information and these tests that they were running, but one of the things I've talked to with medical professionals and other parents who've been in these situations is we need a little bit of a shot across the bow before you unleash a whole world of nevers, because when you say that I don't know that he'll ever talk or he'll ever walk, or if he'll ever be more than what we consider the intellectual ability of a 2-year-old, it's living in a whole world of nevers. That's one of the ways I describe it, is all of a sudden all the dreams that you have, especially knowing how a child who is developing in a typical fashion, you have these dreams of these, brothers getting to play baseball together and playing superhero games and going swimming together, going to school together, growing old together. And so when you're told that everything you had imagined is over, there isn't really anything in place for a family to mourn the life that they thought they were going to have. And I have so many people who sort of are a little bit dismissive of that, or who are like, oh, well, at least he's alive. And I'm not saying that. We still get to have that space of, we have to adjust to a new reality, and there isn't a lot of support for families who come into this reality. And I'm telling you this because, again, my son Declan turns 19 today, and it is a celebration. It is filled with joy. It's also filled with a lot of reflection on how far we've come and the work that we do, my husband and I, in making sure that this boy is safe and loved and given all the opportunities to reach his potential. And we've struggled in the last couple of years. The one thing that Declan had, his big superpower, was that he could walk forever. I used to make videos called What Declan Sees, and we would explore zoos and forests and go to the beach and things like that, because I always called it What Declan Sees because I never showed his face. I always wanted for folks to learn a little bit about how his brain works through his eyes, and basically how he explores the world. And he's very visual, and he's very auditory too. He likes to take in sounds and experiment with different sensories. So I say all this because the last 14 years I have been very involved. Once we got our legs under us, it took us a while. Once Declan came home, and we had this new set of experiences, a baby who was hooked up to a lot of machines and had a lot of medications. And it was hard. It was extremely, folks who look at us and say, I don't know how you do it. I will be very honest with you. I don't know either. I don't know how we've done it either, except that you do it. I think other parents would agree, is that you don't realize how hard it is. You just do it, and then sometimes you're in the middle of it. Believe me, it's overwhelming and frustrating, especially when you're dealing with the healthcare system and scheduling your lives, your caregivers, therapists, appointments, all those things. It's a lot. But once we got our legs under us, and we understood a little bit of what our lives were going to be like, I didn't talk about Declan's disabilities. I'm a stand-up comic, and most of my career was based on telling stories about my family. Initially, about growing up in my wonderful Irish Mexican household, and stories about relationships and jobs I'd had. And then when Griffin was born, I talked about being pregnant and how I got pregnant and being a new mom. And then when Declan was born, I stopped talking about those moments, because I didn't know how to explain to this audience that our lives were not what you hope for, that I'm sorry. Some of us get to dream and wish that our lives are going to be a little bit easier. We get to have that wish. And to that, once we got our legs under us and were able to sort of manage what this new experience was going to be, this new journey, I was around a lot of parents who had children with autism and cerebral palsy and Down syndrome and other kids who never will find out what their disorders are. I have one friend who went through all the testing. She went to the Mayo Clinic, and there are kids and adults who simply will never have a diagnosis. And once I was around a lot of parents, and I know that you'll be surprised to hear this, I'm a little bit aggressive when it comes to making sure that my family has everything they need. And I happen to be in a position, look, I know I've worked toward it, being a communicator and then in radio and having access to a lot of people who are elected or in positions in administrations. And I fought for a lot of, Steve and I both fought for a lot of the services that Declan was able to receive. And I found out as I was going that there were parents who didn't know where to turn, how to get those services, how to get those supports. And that's when I started going to Springfield, because really in Springfield and in your state capitals is where you can hopefully find people who will do the right thing and fight for those who can't fight for themselves. You have so many of these special interests that go down there, the banking industry, the oil industry, all the unions and that. And you know what? That's where they spend their money. There is not enough bandwidth for parents like me to spend time in Springfield or to spend the money on getting people down there to fight for legislation for us. And I've had the guest in the studio, Mike Baker, who I had in studio last week. He has helped craft 7 pieces of legislation that will hopefully make lives better for individuals like Declan across the state of Illinois. And eventually when I ran for office, my goal there and my purpose there was because I know that the state of Illinois is amongst the worst in the country when it comes to services and supports for people with disabilities. And one of the things that parents like me don't say out loud, or at least not very often, and I used to never say it, I was at a fundraiser with a mom. She's from Ireland, and leave it to the Irish to put it like it is. She has a daughter with Downs, and her daughter will never live independently. And we were just talking about just some of our experiences, and she goes, well, I'll tell you one thing. I can't die first. And it was something I had never said out loud, but it was something I knew in my heart, and I knew what she meant, because parents like us never know who's going to love our children as much as we do. And living in a state like Illinois, where we just simply don't do better by those who need it the most. That was why I ran for office. And I will tell you, it is why I fight so hard to make sure that we never let Donald Trump back into that White House again. Because in the 2 weeks before he announced his presidency, my son's school, where these beautiful children are simply there to, again, live to their own potentials, kids with cerebral palsy, with Down syndrome, with autism, this beautiful school where so many dreams and parents were able to feel safe and breathe for once because they knew that there were people that were invested in their kids' futures. It was vandalized with swastikas, and it said words like "kill all the retards." So when Donald Trump announced his presidency, I knew that the people like that had put up these hateful words, that they would be drawn to someone like Donald Trump. And last week, his own nephew came out with a story about how Donald Trump himself said, because his nephew has a child with severe disabilities and will need lifelong care, Donald Trump said, "Wouldn't you be better off if you just let him die?" And I talked about it that day, and I have tried not to think about it, because I know that there are parents right now listening to this who are hurt by words like that. And I am too. And I also give that horrible sentiment the space to drive me to redouble my efforts to make sure that Donald Trump never has the White House again. That's why I show up every day. That's why I'm so passionate about what I do. I know that I get goofy and silly, and, I talk too fast, but all of it is for my boys. It's for your families. It's for the families in our communities. That I think that this is such an important election season, because you know what? I would not be better off if my child had died. And I'll tell you something. He has made so many lives so much better, the least of which is mine. He has made my world a better place. He has taught me how to take a breath, how to enjoy what's right in front of me. And I think we should all do that. We'll take a break here, and I will go blow my nose, everybody. More in a moment on WCPT 820 Heartland Signal. Happy 19th birthday to my beautiful boy.